Okay, so now after that, everybody can turn and face me a little bit. So just kind of angle yourself so you can watch me. So we start off any kind of Dharma talk or Sangha action with a gasho, which is two hands together in unity, and a bow in respect to the Buddha nature within us all. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Zen Kai at Blue Mountain Zendo. I'd like to touch on some things kind of quickly before I get on with this series. And with my focus on this topic, it's not my intent at all to make people feel bad, to make people think that the finger is being pointed at them or a finger is being pointed at some group. This talk is not about right or wrong. It's not about awake or asleep. But it's about inviting you to ponder these topics to see how and if they apply to you and the world around you. It is really quite wondrous to me to think about how the human brain works and to think about all the things that are unknown about it. Just the amount of information that's processed without us even knowing is kind of very intriguing. A French psychologist by the name of Pierre Genet had actually coined the term subconscient, which later became subconscious to us. And it's really my experience that this subconscious is really a powerful tool for us. And it really takes something unique or something out of the ordinary to really cut through or disrupt this process of suppression to where these things come to our conscious and we're able to see and watch them. The practice of Zazen, which is our core practice here and in Zen in particular, I think is a great conduit for this window into our subconscious. There was a cognitive linguist by the name of George Lakoff, and he had said, most people don't know what they think. That's extremely scary, that the public doesn't want to be told this either, he says. You don't know what you think, just a fact. The fact is that about 98% of thought is unconscious, he says. 98% of our thought we're not even aware of. So almost all of our mental activity is really hidden from us. And without awareness, I'd like to begin the investigation into the topic of this series. In part of the Vinaya Pitaka, called the Mahavagga, there's a story about the Buddha and his attendant and cousin Ananda. And it says that one day they're walking through the forest, going kind of from temple to temple, just kind of checking things out, seeing what's going on, seeing if things are up to par. And they come across this very large temple. And when they get there, there's nobody around but this one monk. And it's very clear that this monk is sick, infirm, very, very weak. He's kind of sitting in very disheveled robes, soiled, and you could really tell that he wasn't being watched after. And the Buddha was very upset by this, and he had asked this monk, he had said, why aren't you being cared of or for? And this monk said, my Lord, it is not because my brothers did not take care of me, but because they have taken care of me for so long, I am very reluctant to let them continue like that. Then the Buddha asked his attendant Ananda to go and fetch water and a towel, and he himself cleaned the monk's room, and he himself cleaned the monk's soiled robes. When the other monks came home, the Buddha said, when you have become a monk, the Sangha is your family. If we monks do not take care of each other, who will take care of us? So please, from now on, remember that taking care of his brother or sister, monk or nun, is taking care of me, of the Buddha, of myself. So that was 2,600 years ago, around then, you know. And we're still not doing this. Still not doing this. Still not taking care of one another. And I think that it's about time that we do. That we really take this message from Siddhartha and begin to investigate it and apply it. Exactly what did he mean? I see the result of this investigation, this journey, a need to reach out to our Dharma brothers and sisters who have sickness, disability, or limitations, so that they have access and support that they require in order to practice. It is this awakened view which will open the doors very wide for these men and women, and the result will be a strengthening and solidification of our culture, not a weakening of it. And by adding these members to our society as equals and whole, will add their unique insight and wisdom. This is long overdue. And I think that anybody who seeks the Dharma should have access to it. This is not an exclusive practice for a population based on social norms and roles. The first monastery that I trained at, I remember entering into the Zendo, and everybody was seated in a very traditional position. Most in at least half lotus, and nobody in chairs. And I remember one gentleman who walked with a limp, and in talking to him one evening, he had said that the practice here is for the beautiful people. And I remember thinking that what a shame if just one person thinks this, no less, you know, whole societies and world cultures, that there are all these people that think this. So I'd like to talk a little bit on why I feel confident, and maybe why I seem a little bit like a Southern Baptist minister when talking about this topic. At the age of 25, after graduating college and watching all of my friends go on to get various jobs and marry and you know, begin to build their lives, I was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, degenerative facet disease, which is a progressive deterioration of the spine. And at 25, really when I was just collecting things and kind of gathering my idea of what my identity was, everything was kind of taken away from me. And I had my first major surgery, which basically changed my life forever. And this is something that happens to a great deal of people. So I have a lot of first-hand knowledge on this, and I'm probably one of a small group of people who, even though understood that there was going to be great obstacles, continue to practice then and continue to investigate it. Now, throughout, I said degenerative, so, you know, throughout my life after 25, you know, I've had surgeries, most recent, I guess, like 2 or 3 years ago, where I had a laminectomy, which is basically like decompressing the spinal cord when the structure around it becomes too narrow and begins to compress it. Now, and the reason I share this, I don't want sympathy, because, you know what, the one thing that I learned, people don't really give you sympathy. So my idea and my reason for offering this is that you can see that what I am offering is not a discourse on social psychology or psychology, but comes from a place of experience, personal experience. And also kind of a tribute that if this practice can put me in a position to sit before you in this way for close to 20 years now, then there must be something to it, because a lot of my peers aren't so lucky, don't fare so well. So every person kind of adjusts and contrasts differently to things that you could call struggle in their life. And you know, for me, all of this occurring was actually the catalyst to begin a exploration into life itself, and an exploration away from kind of the very normal things we think that give us identity, our occupation, our marital status, our socioeconomical status, all of these things were taken away from me. So I'm kind of like starting from scratch, you know. What is all of this? What does this mean? I was just kind of getting the hang of it, and now, now I'm back at square one, right? So there are many doors really for entering a spiritual practice, and this was mine, you know. And for you, it may be something different. But now that you kind of have a basic understanding of my background and from the place that I speak, I'd like to move a little bit more forward and start to develop the topic from which this series is based upon. And I'm not going to announce it immediately, and you'll understand why, hopefully. So, for quite some time I've been trying to figure out, well, what do I call this topic? What do I call the thesis of this series, you know? And, you know, to be honest with you, like a lot of the concepts that we use right now in society, like impairment, disability, handicap, weakness, I thought about using all of these, you know, and I almost kind of would decided on weakness, because, you know, this is kind of a very broad thing. You know, for me, it's kind of a perspective on some kind of disability or impairment, but, you know, this can be seen both in micro-social systems and in macro-social systems, meaning that, you know, it can go from a range of, you know, being sick at work for 2 or 3 weeks and this chain of events occurring to, you know, losing a limb or to being diagnosed with cancer. So it's very broad, very, very broad. And the other thing is when we say things like disability or handicap, you know, it really is connotated. It's stigmatized when we think about these things. We think disability, oh, it was somebody in a wheelchair, a blind guy with a cane, you know, and we think, oh, well, how horrible life must be for those people. You know, and a lot of people that are in these situations and have this karma, well, they don't think of themselves that way. They don't think that they're disabled. They don't think that they're handicapped. You know, not whatsoever. So what to call this was kind of an interesting endeavor, nonetheless. And, you know, with this Dharma talk, the idea, again, is not to look at it as positive or negative. You know, it's not meant to see things with pity. It's meant as an open and honest exploration into this topic and behavior. So not good, not bad, right? Nonetheless, kind of just this, just as it is, as it unfolds. So back to what to call it, right? So I'm looking, and of course, you know, when you're interested in something and we're trying to figure something out, you know, nowadays you go to the web, right? So I go to the web, what to call it, and I'm looking through these things. So I found it interesting that actually I found the definition of what I was going to call it on the United Nations webpage. And I find it kind of really interesting and a great example of how societies decide what is considered an impairment or a disability. And trying to separate the social influence from these definitions is impossible. And the United Nations basically had 3 definitions on their website. The first one being impairment, which they define as any loss or abnormality of psychological or anatomical structure or function. And the other 2 are more a result of impairment. We have disability, which is listed as any restriction or lack resulting from an impairment or ability to perform an activity in the manner or within the range considered normal for a human being. Normal for a human being. And that's a term we'll hear a lot in this series. And the last is handicap. And it is a disadvantage for a given individual resulting from an impairment or disability that limits or prevents the fulfillment of a role that is normal. Again, normal. So we can see the contrast arising already from a societal influence. Now, I decided on impairment because I thought, it's pretty direct and pretty clear and doesn't cross the line into stigma or into stereotyping, So I decided on impairment, and I decided on it because I thought it was pretty direct and clear. It doesn't have a lot of stigma or stereotype attached to it, right? I mean, if we hear impairment, I have an impairment, it really kind of is nebulous. But if we say, hey, I have a handicap or I have a disability, well, that kind of evokes something different, kind of a different experience and different view of those concepts. So I'd like to demonstrate this a little bit, and I'd like to look at some examples, right? And really what I'm hoping is I hope these examples will kind of illustrate the difficulty of defining disability without the consideration of social influence. So just see what you think. What comes to mind, just do this in your head. Try not to filter your reactions to these situations. So a person who has a cochlear implant. Everybody know what that is? It's like an implant in the ear, helps people to hear. So somebody that has that, they disabled. A person who has a digestive disorder that requires a very restrictive diet. Are they disabled? A person following a strict regime of medications, well, such as a diabetic. Are they disabled? How about a person with serious carpal tunnel syndrome? Person with high blood pressure, takes medication, high triglycerides. Are they disabled? Because now these are things, these are impairments. These are things that are not normal, that we don't consider normal. How about somebody with glasses? Are they disabled? Because it is considered an impairment. It's something that is not, quote, normal. How about a person that's short? Well, I mean, if they can't reach something off the shelf that normal people of normal height can, well, it would be defined as a disability, right? So it's kind of silly. We can kind of see, well, some things are a disability. But if I would say, well, is a blind man disabled? Oh, yeah, well, of course. Is a guy in a wheelchair disabled? Oh, well, of course, of course. But if I say, well, is a short person disabled? Oh, well, that's ridiculous. It's defined by society. You cannot separate those two. Now, if we look at this curve, we can see that it's a normal bell curve. And now, if we look at what we're talking about and how society defines this as normal, which we've heard several times, even from the United Nations, normal and abnormal or impaired or disabled, we would really expect to see, if we're looking at statistics on this, to see some kind of skewed numbers, where normal would be over here, and then, it would kind of filter out, and, and abnormal or disabled would be over here. But we don't. What we see when we look at the numbers is that the majority of the people are in the middle. Not at one end and not at the other. So where is this normal coming from? Who defines this normal? Cultures, societies, groups define what is normal and what is abnormal or disability. The reality is most people will experience some form of impairment or disability in their life. I mean, really, if you're very sick, You know, and hopefully none of you will be, but the odds are that you're going to get really sick, you know, hopefully you recover from it. You know, you may have some kind of disability that's short term. Well, maybe you break your leg, maybe you break your arm, maybe you've done it already and kind of know what I'm talking about. You know, you have that period where you realize, wow, I just really can't do the things that I used to, and now people are kind of treating me a little bit different because I have the cast on my arm. Oh, what happened? You know, so it's very interesting. You know, and I was looking, and the Department of Labor in 2013 statistics says that 20.7% of Americans fit the concept or label of disabled. That's almost 1/4 of the population of the United States fits the concept of disabled. 1/4. That clouds the water even more. If 1/4 of us fit this concept or fit the criteria for the concept, then maybe it's not so black and white. Maybe normal and abnormal are just creations, and that really what is what's in the middle, you know? So I think that, you know, given this reality of kind of looking to see what the numbers are and thinking outside of the box, I think if disability or impairment were more commonly recognized and expected within our culture, I think the outcome would be a huge change and alteration into our environment and systems. Meaning we would see these things much differently. You know, we wouldn't see this normal and disabled. We wouldn't have these stereotypes or stigmas. It would be more inclusive and more realistic of what the human condition is. And not only that, a lot of people think that somehow that these people or impairment in general weaken a society and weaken a culture. But I would say the opposite. That if we stop ostracizing this, you know, this concept, this fantasy that we've created about normal and abnormal, then all of these people that we've isolated to this one side, we could integrate into the society and use the wisdom and resources that they offer, whether they offer them in a different way than we do or not. Nonetheless, resources and wisdom. In the West, there's many, many things that we try to hide from and we try to suppress. Sickness, disability, old age, death. You know, all things that horrify us and things that we've become very skilled at avoiding. Right? One of the reasons why we've become so skilled at these things is fear. Fear of these things. You know, as we said before, we kind of isolate these people. You know, these people. I say these people, but I mean anybody that fits the that criteria of impairment or disability, including old age and death, because old age too would be a disability. Because you could no longer do what you did before, and you're, quote, not as productive to society anymore. You know, you may be more frail, a little bit slower, all of this stuff, right? So all of these things we kind of, push away and hide. The Buddha had said, when ignorant people see someone who is sick, they are disgusted and horrified, even though they too will be sick someday. I thought to myself, I don't want to be like the ignorant people. After that, I couldn't feel the usual intoxication of health anymore. I mean, what do we do with old people? Where do old people go? And yes, Florida, but where else do they go? Right? Anybody?
Nursing homes.
Nursing homes, right? We put old people away in nursing homes because that's where old people go. Where do we put dying people usually?
Hospices.
Well, that's kind of new, but I mean traditionally,
Hospitals.
Hospitals. Isolated in hospitals, away from us, away from view. So we don't have to see this, and we don't have to become anxious and fearful. So these are things that we kind of hide. Right? And hospice is true, but that's kind of something new. But most people, unfortunately, still die in hospitals. I watched a film a couple weeks ago, and the film was on India. And it was kind of a little documentary of a little window into Indian culture. And they have one scene, it was on the Ganges River. Everybody's familiar with the Ganges. It's kind of very sacred to the Indian culture. And it was this funeral area, this pyre area, this cremation area. And, you know, it was at dusk, so you could kind of see, you know, the flames, and you could obviously see bodies on the pyres and everything like that. But the really interesting thing is probably 20 feet from this were children playing in the water, skipping rocks. Just like, you know, you did, just like kids do now, you know, just having fun, playing, right next to death. Now that's something that if we saw, we would be absolutely floored, you know. A kid playing next to a funeral going on or something like that would be, you know, absolutely just taken back. But it's interesting to see that in a culture where death is open, is offered in a very open way, as part of life, and not something to be feared, not something to be hidden in some, you know, structure that's away from everybody and isolated, but something that is a part of life, just like eating and walking and sleeping, all of that. Then the way that we perceive these and the way that culture deals with these topics is very different, very inclusive. So these kids had been exposed to this probably all of their life, you know, and think about how you reacted. I don't know, hopefully maybe some of you haven't had to yet, but maybe some of you had gone to a funeral. And the difference kind of in our awareness and understanding of these things. Not something to be feared, you know, not something that creates great anxiety, but just a normal part of life. Nothing separate, nothing different, nothing strange. Just part of living. So during the time I've been working on this discourse, and it took some time, and I'll explain why in a little bit. I've also been working on a prison sangha for Northampton County Prison. Somebody had approached me and asked me if I would be interested in starting a sangha for the prison. And of course, I was like, sure, but I don't know really anything about prison. Never was there. Hopefully I never will be there. But, you know, know very, very little about it. Don't know about the culture. You know, just know what I saw on TV, and as most of you know, what you see on TV, even reality shows, really aren't realistic whatsoever. So I'm investigating. I'm trying to figure out, you know, what's prison culture like? You know, what is it to be a prisoner? What are the ups and downs? And, you know, and I came across a quote, and I thought it fit in perfectly within this series on impairment. And it was from a guy. It was for a guide for prisoners, meaning that you know, it was just probably some guy that had been to prison and wanted to help other people out, and probably wrote this. You know, maybe you're preparing to go to prison or something like that, and want to know what to do and what not to do. Anyway, so this is on the internet. You could probably go there and read it yourself. It's a whole bunch of like different bullets of do's and don'ts, and one of them I found very interested and pertinent to this topic. And it said, "Do not cry or show vulnerability publicly, as doing so will quickly make you a target for other prisoners." And I thought it very interesting, and not only interesting, but I realized that a lot of these behaviors that we exhibit, both individual behavior and cultural behavior, are a result of almost 200,000 years of evolution. That there are reasons for these behaviors. So we kind of intuitively know that keeping weakness is something that we should really not lit out easily, not demonstrate easily. And I think kind of in the, you know, the hot pot of what prison is, and working in close proximity, living in close proximity with people that maybe you really don't want to, that a lot of these things boil out, and a lot of these very instinctual behaviors bubble up to the surface. And I think that this is not something that we find just within prisons, but I think this is something that we find within groups and cultures, that we try to hide these things from other people. And there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it. I've been doing session in this tradition, in the Japanese Zen tradition, I guess for about 15 years. In total, probably close to 18 years in some other traditions. And the last session that I did, and explain to the new people here, what session is a session is a period of time in which we do intensive meditation and Zen practice. We're up at 4:30 in the morning in the Zendo or the meditation room by 5, and we do this until 10 o'clock at night. And usually you get probably about 3.5 hours to 4 hours of sleep every night. So kind of very tired, very physically taxing. And I explained a little bit in the beginning about what my impairments were for a reason, and one of them, so you would understand what I was talking about with this session. So normally session's very difficult for me. It's difficult for anybody if you could think about it. Think about not being able to move like you are now. And I see I see you moving, and you know what, and this is perfectly fine because it's a great point. You can see what I mean. It can be very uncomfortable, and even for somebody that has sat for years. Believe me, after like 4 or 5 days of this, everybody's like, it's not easy. So you can kind of imagine, and sometimes I almost have to laugh at myself. I'm like, out of all like the spiritual practices I pick the one that's the most physically demanding. Sometimes I just gotta laugh, like, what am I thinking? So I'm, going through a lot of what you're going through, kind of times 10. And I've never had to leave a session or leave a block out of 15 years. But last session I did. And it was because on day 5, when I was starting to feel like, you're feeling times 10, I got the flu on top of it. So basically, this is turning into like, either, has anybody been out on a small boat in the ocean and found out that they get seasick very easily? And there's no way off the boat. Nobody's turning it around for you and driving it back to shore so you can get off. Or maybe a ride. Anybody ever jumped on an amusement ride and been like, kind of tentative, but yeah, okay, I'll do it. And then you're on it and you're like, oh my God, but you just can't get off of it. I mean, there's nothing you can do. So, here's me kind of sitting in session, just on this ride that I cannot stop. But the really interesting thing about this ride is the whole time I'm watching. I'm watching it and I'm aware. I'm aware I'm on this ride and really want to get off, but can't. But I'm also watching how I'm reacting, why I'm reacting the way that I am, and the reaction of those around me to how I am experiencing, what my karma is or what I'm going through. And that really is the basis of where this Dharma talk came from, was that awareness. So again, I promised in the beginning to people that this was not a discourse on social psychology or anything like that. This is all from my experience. So I've thrown in a couple statistics just to give a little weight to what I'm saying, but this is all based on experiences. One of the things that I noticed that was most important was, everybody knows, it's kind of common knowledge, right, that your interior state or your mindset greatly affects the way you see the world around you. You feel horrible, the world's miserable. It's a horrible place to be. You feel great, the world's wonderful, right? So I'm not discounting that whatsoever, but I'm just introducing kind of another aspect to it. And that is, yes, your perception alters the way that you see the world around you. However, your perception also alters the way people see you around you. And this is something that I really isolated and I really saw vividly, was that my experience, my period of weakness and limitation and sickness was creating a response in the people around me. And they were acting and treating me much differently than they had before. And I couldn't figure out exactly why. Why is this going on? You know, never quite noticed this before. You know, it's always quite. It's always like something that, you know, you hear and like, oh yeah. You know, people treat you different in different situations. Yeah. But to actually like really go through it and really see it very, very clearly and very, very vividly is another experience altogether. So it was during this period that I really realized that there was a dynamic going on, a dynamic within the group in response to a member being perceived as being weakened or not contributing. And I saw that somewhere else. And you guys are gonna like this. I saw it in my house. I have 5 cats, right? I only bought one. The other 4, I don't know if you were around when the blue one ran in the Zendo, and it's been in ever since. Yeah, so I have like 4 strays that you know, that's a Dharma talk altogether. People just kind of throw away, and then I see them, and I'm like, oh. And you know, they end up in the house with me. Well, so the older one's about 15 years, and this 15 years old. It's been going blind for a couple years now. And one of the things that I noticed is that the other 4 cats would just kind of spontaneously attack the one that was going blind for no reason at all. And this became more and more progressive, and the cats began to become more and more violent and towards this cat that was going blind, to a point now where I actually have to lock the cat up from the others unless I'm with it, because the others, I think, would probably try to kill it at this point in time because she's almost totally blind. Right? And it's very interesting because, you know, it's not to that extent, I'm not saying that, but it's a very similar behavior to what I saw in session. It's a very similar behavior in the sense that there was someone or some member that was perceived as a threat to the health of the larger group. And it may seem very primitive, right? And it may seem kind of very animalistic, right? We kind of don't want to see ourselves in that way. But we are animals. That is true, whether we like it or not. And again, you know, this evolution, our evolution, is a part of us, a very big part of us. And most of the time we're unaware of it because it is subconscious within us. So, if we don't see this cycle, if we don't catch this, right? If we don't have the ability to like watch this and know that we're a part of this dance, this subconscious dance, or if we don't have you know, the ability to watch this go on in another species, this same kind of behavior, then that member or that individual really will begin to take on a very kind of gray role within society. The role of outcast. The role of handicapped. And many who have disabilities, or many people that have some kind of impairments, learn how to be impaired or how to be disabled by the class or the normals. The people that are considered to meet the criteria of normal. So people who have disabilities kind of are stereotyped, stigmatized by the normals, and then follow a process of watching how the normals respond to them. And depending on what the normal's response is to them, they adjust their behavior and learn to become disabled, to become sick, to become impaired. This is something that's very much learned. I remember after that last session, I went to my teacher and I said, I really have a question to ask you. And I didn't tell him about why the question was being asked or what was behind it, but I said to him, do people treat you differently when they view you as contributing less or when they view you as disabled or sick? And he looked at me and he said, no hesitation, yes. So one of the reasons why I asked is my teacher happens also to be a psychologist. So he has insight into this other than from a Zen Buddhist perspective. And I thought it was very interesting. And it kind of really solidified my resolve to bring awareness to this behavior and once again to invite people to investigate this, to see if it does apply to them. If it doesn't, then welcome to leave it at the door on the way out. But if it does, not just investigate it, but to try to create change, very simple change. And I truly believe that this behavior, that this kind of dance is designed to weed out the perceived weak member or weak individual out of the group, or out of, with the cats, out of the pride. And I've seen it before. I've seen it before. And I think it's one of the reasons why in that advice given to prisoners, why he said, don't show weakness, because you'll become prey. Because people pick up on that. They pick up on those cues, and they act accordingly. One of the ways that we protect ourselves from this isolation, many times is a counter defense, in which we kind of conceal ourselves from the rest of the group. Many times we don't throw out that we have some kind of impairment or that we're sick. There's a lot of people that will see that are really sick, but they refuse to tell you that they're sick, or they refuse to tell you how sick they are. And then you find out kind of later. And I think that this is kind of a very natural thing to do. Just as if you've ever watched about animals, if one breaks his leg or if one gets hurt in a fight, what do they normally do? They normally try to conceal the injury as much as possible, because I think, instinctually they know that if they show this, that if they're open about this, that the group will weed them out, will isolate them and push them out. And that's usually really what happens. And this is done, and again, I said in the beginning, not good, not bad, right? So this is done, I'm sure, evolution has designed this to protect the majority, to protect those that are healthy, by eliminating or pushing out those that are sick and weak. It's evolution, if you believe in evolution. But even in a kind of very narrow sense, we could see how that would work. So how do people with impairments and disability commonly react to the experience of being isolated from the group? That's very important too. And I want you to remember once again that, these behaviors can be seen not just, it seems that we're just talking about people with disabilities and sickness, but we're really not. We're really talking about when anybody exhibits some kind of deviance that the group finds deviant for any extended period of time. That we can see this behavior of isolating and pushing out the member that is showing this kind of deviance or difference in fear of somehow weakening the group. There's a German sociologist by the name of Gerard Falk. Anybody heard of him? Falk? No? Okay. And he concluded that we in all societies will always stigmatize some condition and some behavior because doing so provides the group solidarity by delineating outsider from insider. Stigmatization and its essence is a challenge to one's humanity for both the stigmatized person and the stigmatizer. A very